Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along to this session. As Philip says, it's how to extract valuable insights from Moodle logs. It's down to Philip to basically show us how he's been using it, and like Richard mentioned briefly a second ago, where for people like myself, it's seeing it from seeing from the academic point of view what there's the technical side of it, but how do you use that? So, Philip, thank you very much, and over to you.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Tom, and hello to everybody here. Okay. Yes. So this is going to be fun. I'm going to enjoy this. I've got quite a lot of slides, so it is labelled as an advanced talk, and I think it probably does qualify as advanced. Right. Okay. So this was it. This was my motivation, and I actually put up Mr. Orangutan here because this summer was going to be a great trip to Borneo to see the orangutans, and obviously that didn't happen. But here he is, lovely photo, scratching his head. What are those students doing with all the wonderful stuff I have sweated blood over to create in the weeks leading up to term? That was really the big question I wanted to know. And as the term started, I started getting a bit more concerned that things weren't maybe happening as hoped. And I thought, I've got to find out what's going on here. And I sort of came up with, these are the kind of questions, looking back, these are the kind of questions. What could I learn from the Moodle logs? Every so often I've looked at Moodle logs and I know they've got bits of data, but I've never really dug around in them. But I just sort of think, well, what can I learn from them? And what should I change as a result? Is there something I should then go, aha, I didn't know that. I could make some changes. And then what should I share with everybody else, like yourselves? What is it I could extract? And what about sharing with students? Now, I think that's a really good question, and we will come back to these questions. I don't have answers to all of them. I've got thoughts on some of them, but particularly that last one's quite interesting. Okay, so let's set the scene. Oh, this is where we're going to get to. We're going to get to data analysis. Actually, not all of these graphs I'm going to present. Some of them have changed a bit, but I've been through data. I've analysed it. I'm going to show you how I got to it and what these say about what's going on Moodle. Firstly, a little bit about how I use Moodle, just to say. So this is a typical block from a module. I'm teaching quite a few modules. I've got 3 big modules actually on the run at the moment. And this module I've taken this from is one where I do about 80 to 90% of it. So here's a typical block. And I'm just showing on it that we've got, I often do a little bit about the week, and that's either an audio or something there. Sometimes use the Moodle audio objects, other times use the Panopto one. A section, I use books quite a lot. I will talk more about books, so I've structured that. I've got a quiz there, sort of test your knowledge quiz. I've got links to things like Padlet, so just a hyperlink there, and I've got reading lists, and I've got files. So I've got quite a lot of stuff on the Moodle. In fact, here's a book. So what I used the books down there we've got the table of contents, pages or chapters and sub-chapters is the language for Moodle. Typically, I put a video on. Some will have a bit of text. Some will have H5P objects. Here's one that's got 2 H5P objects. They are testing your knowledge of something there. So you might have read something and then come along and tested whether you know the answers. Then I've got drag and drop H5P objects. I've created quite a few of those, some more elaborate than others. I use Padlets and I use quizzes. So that gives you a scene of all the kind of learning objects that I'm making use of. And what can you find out now? So just to remind everybody of where we are now, we've got the various reports available. We've got the activity report. This is just an element. I've just extracted a bit of it. Here we've got a book. A couple of H5P, another book. What's that? That's going to be a page, I think. Is that a page? And then we've got more H5P objects, and then we've got pages or files. Then maybe they're files, can't remember. But this tells you, doesn't it? It tells you how many views by how many unique students or users. And of course, it doesn't distinguish between students. Can't remember. Does it distinguish between students and other people? Not quite certain. Can't quite remember. But you basically just get to see this is how many views by a number of people. You don't know exactly who individually, of course, and you don't know much else when that happened. I think you can limit the search in some way. Can't quite remember. If you go to the course participation, you can select individual items like a book, like a page, like a URL, and so on. And you can then see, I've removed the student names, but you can say, no, the student hasn't. Yes, this person has 23 times. You know that. You don't know if it's a book. This is a book, I think. 23 something in that book. That book's got a number of pages. I don't know more than that. So I'm a bit in the dark. At least I can see they accessed it, and they accessed it quite a few times. But what more? I don't know. Of course, I can limit that on, I think, can you limit it? You can look back either a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but you can't really home in on a time. Then you've got the completion. This is a binary report. It tells you they did everything or didn't do everything. So they might have done half of it, but you won't know that from this. And it's a big table. You can't see the whole lot in one shot at it. If you've got a lot of things, you've got a very busy table, as this is, because this is not a full table, there's more in it. And you can download it as a comma separated file. And here I've got it. So you probably can't read it, but here you've got the titles of things. It just says not completed, completed, gives you the date of completion. And that's it. So there is some data there. You've got the statistics, which gives you the counts, student views, student posts by week. So you get something there. So yeah, so somebody, I was just going over what you can learn from a Moodle, what the kind of reports you've got. And then we come to logs. So we've got a number of reports. They are isolated. They give you something, it's not simple to actually learn from them. You've got a lot of looking across and so on. It's not ideal in some ways, but that led me to the logs and thinking, well, what can I learn from the logs? And here is a shot of the logs. Now, when you get to the log screen, you've got this, you can select participants, days, you can select various things. But if you just say accept everything and you just get the logs, you'll get a big file. It'll be on many, many pages. And actually, I was prepared to put this because it's got me and it's got the librarian Hannah on it. It didn't have any students, so I was prepared to show it. And it shows you every row, is some kind of click, some kind of interaction with the Moodle session, with the Moodle site. And you can download it as a big file. And this is a bit of a file. It will probably, the files for my modules are sort of in the tens of thousands of rows. So I think this file is 30-odd thousand, 34,000 long. In the bigger one, it could be bigger. So you're talking about fairly substantial data files, but in terms of modern day, nothing particularly special, and perfectly fine to handle in things like Excel and Google Sheets. So this is good to show what you've got in a page. It's every row is an interaction. You've got a time, you've got an identifier. I've actually changed this from the names to student numbers just to hide their names. So keep that. I've just done that for this presentation. It tells you what they clicked on, what that is categorized at. That kind of activity gives you some text information, and it gives you a few more files as well, a few more columns as well. I've just highlighted. You've got a book action H5P. So this column is quite useful, as it distinguishes the kind of component that you have, and there'll be others, URLs, pages, other things that are distinguished here. I didn't try to capture all of them, but it just gives you a flavor of what's in. I'm going to come back to that a little bit more. My process is download the Moodle log, bring it into Google Sheet. I clean it up a bit and do a bit of sorting. That's actually quite simple once you set it up. Then the first time you do it, you start adding a few extra columns to help analyze it, and then you do some pivot table magic. And I'll talk a little bit about pivot tables. Once you've done it once and set up quite a few pivot tables, you just download the log, import, to quickly do a bit of cleaning and sorting, and you're up again. You don't have to recreate all these pivot tables. They're all created for you. They live on, so you don't have to redo the whole thing again. You can just update and download another file. It probably takes me about 4 or 5 minutes to get a new file into the system when I want to do an update. Here's a pivot table, and here's actually in Google. I use Google Sheets. I tried Excel and I tried Google Sheets, and I found Google Sheets has one nifty little measure which is very useful. It's called Count Unique, which is not I couldn't see exactly in Excel, so I've stuck with Sheets. And of course, Sheets is something you can share as well. So now it's a bit smaller, no, but this actually is a pivot table, and this is the when you set up a pivot table, you get this. Can you you get rows, you get columns, you get values, you get filters, and these are what you use to set up your pivot sheet. And essentially, it's a nice way of extracting data in an organized way from a database. Here we've got components. You probably can't read that. Book. External tool, file, H5P, that's pages, that's quiz, that's URL. These are specific books. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think if I can read that right, 8 specific books. There's one external tool, a whole bunch of files, a whole bunch, and this is giving me information. So let me zoom in a little bit on that to show you, so you can see a book. And the way I've set this up is I've set up some rows, and those rows I've selected component and event context. The component is here, a book is a component. The event context is the specific version of that book. And so you can see those two then take up the columns. I know it's called rows, but they actually form, so that each row is a separate entry there. And then I haven't actually used columns here because I've just gone straight to values, and I've got 2 values. One, I'm counting the unique unique usernames that have looked at or interacted with this item. And then I'm also counting the total number of times that they have interacted. So this shows me that 69 separate students, unique students, have looked at that book. 64 have looked at the next book. 65, 1 has looked at that book. So those are unique students. And then I've got 1,246 total views. Those 69 have had 1,246 total views of that book. And I can go down each one. I can see what they've done, the total number of students that have looked at things. So that gives me a bit of a view. Now, this actually is one student. I've used a filter to say, I just want to look at one student, and I've picked out a student. And this tells me that student has looked at all these books, all these files, H5Ps, pages, quizzes, and so on. The count of the unique student is 1 because it's one student. And this is the number of times that student has interacted with each of these things, okay? Here's another student. It's a much shorter list, and this is beginning to understand how we can get information out of here. Now, this student, this is a total summary of this student. The student has not looked at any books, has looked at some files, has not looked at any H5P, which is not surprising because all H5P are buried in books. And so on, had done 1 quiz only, actually missed the first test, which is Carrie's mark, so it's missing that. So I've got a summary, and so the first thing is I can see a big difference between students. And in fact, when I go through, I've actually got the students and organized them and ranked them by the number of what I call learning objects that I've created. So here's books, H5P, files, URL, all that big list. So the best student, let's say, or the most interaction is this student, 70 odd items there, and it goes down, and we get right down, and we see maybe 1 item. So we've got a big range of using or interacting with these learning objects. And this is I took this snapshot on Monday. So we are in what I consider to be teaching week 5 here. So we've had plenty of time to get going. Okay, so that is an insight there. Now, if you go back to that list, we'll see, you know, I said 69 unique students who interacted that book, 64, 65. This is 87. 87 have, if we look at all these books, there have been 87 unique students have looked at these books, 87. Now, that's good, but there's more than 87 on my unit, on my module. And this is a list here by the number of books they've looked at. So one student has looked at 8, because there were 2 more that only just released on Monday or Sunday morning. So one's keenly getting going into it. Quite a lot have looked at 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So these students have not looked at any of my books. Now, it's just going back to that. The books are where I really contain, these contain the learning materials. So the videos and the exercises, lots of videos, and these students have looked at none of them in the 5 weeks. So this is giving us some insight about amount of engagement and the variation. Now, if I go back here to the log, I showed you the book H5P file. Actually, there's more information. These are a few rows about books. And what we've got here is in this text field, we actually have chapter ID. So 208803 is a unique ID of a particular chapter in the book. And then we've got 208795, 208803, 208, and so on. Each of these are unique chapters. So I can actually, I've got more information in this log. So if I'm a bit clever, I can write a little bit of code here. I can actually extract that text string from this field. And then I can build up a picture of the pages that a student, this is a single student. And what this single student, I've got the pages. So each page is down here of a book. And I can see the number of times that student has viewed that page. I've also been a bit clever. I've segregated it using the timestamp into different weeks of the term. So this student looked at this book in the 2nd week, or what I call the 2nd week. 0, I take as induction here. Now these books aren't actually in order they released. So these were the first 2 books. Then there were 2 books. Then there was another book, and then there was another book. So we see this student has pretty well looked at them in the order that they came out, and has looked at them in that week and not revisited. So some students you'll see revisiting books throughout the term. Others you'll see like this. They do it once. Now, what this tells you that they looked at the first page 10 times, the second page 4 times, 6 times, 7 times, 9 times. So actually they've looked at different pages a different number of times. Now, a feature of the book is you don't constrain the sequence in which a student can look at the book. They can jump around and do anything, and they can come back to a page if they want to. So we've got some interesting insight about the student behavior there. Now, if I move on and say, this is actually all students looking at books. So we take that book that student looked at it in week 2, but we see some students looked at it actually in week 0, because I did make them available early, and some have looked in week 3, in week 4, and in week 5. So we get to see a pattern. We see, obviously, there was the big week in week 2, then we can look at all these things. Now, there's something I want to look at in this data, which is quite informative. Page, you see, these are in page order, I believe. I haven't actually formally gone through and just tried to check, because annoyingly, you know, obviously the numbers, but I reckon they're probably in page order, or mostly in page order. What's interesting here is, look, I've got 70 unique students have looked at the first page, then 50, then 44, then 43, then 42, then 39. You see, we're getting a drop off as we go through the book, and that is through all of the books. It's like there are 1 or 2 that just don't quite follow that pattern exactly. Like we've got a 38 to a 39 there. It doesn't quite. But in general, we see a drop off as students work through a book. They've got videos, they've got reading, they've got exercises. We're seeing drop off as they go. So only 30 students have got to the last page of that book. 70 have started it. Only 30 have got to the end. And here we go, 66 down to 27, 65 down to 39. So we do see a drop off in student going through the chapters of the books. So that's another insight from this. That's just zooming in to show that, just in case. So if we actually go to that, the data above I presented was the number of books that students had looked at, and now this is number of well, they call it chapters, number of chapters that have looked at. Now they don't exactly line up the student numbers, but I've just compressed this so we see those ones with 0 are not shown here, and actually that last student is the very last one here. So there's it's not quite exactly marrying up, but obviously the more books you look at, the more chances you look at pages. So we've got some students have looked at 50 odd pages, others have looked at less. So we can start seeing information at the, I call them pages, by the way, I know Moodle calls them chapters. You can see at that level of information how many are looking at things. If we go back to our table here, the book, here we've got the book. Again, I picked out these things. Now, what's interesting, I've got a timestamp for each chapter. And this tells me that I can calculate, I could use this to calculate how long they've been studying that chapter for. And I do that by looking at the difference. So they entered this chapter at 1737. They entered their next click was on the next chapter at 1745. So that was 8 minutes in that chapter. So I can extract this information from the table. So I can get dwell time, what I call dwell time in a chapter. And this is a little bit, have I got a bigger? Yes, I've got a bigger one here. So here we see back to this student, 10 times they've looked at chapter 1. And I've summed up all the time they've been in chapter 1. That's 25 minutes in total. Over the 10 times they visited, 25 minutes in total. The next chapter, 4 times, total 9 minutes, 6:53. This one, they visited 9, it was 82 in total time. So we see. So we get to see a pattern and we can look at all of them. Now, you will notice this chapter's got 0. Now, does that mean they just jumped over that chapter? No, it doesn't, because that chapter will have had is almost certainly got an H5P object. And when the H5P object comes in, Moodle sort of immediately starts logging the fact that they've seen an H5P object, and therefore my little method of calculating dwell time gets a bit doesn't quite work there. So when you see a 0, it doesn't actually always mean 0. It means they probably saw an H5P object, but I can get a feel for the amount of time they're spending in books. So if I look at students here, each dot represents a student here. Each dot represents a student. And this is the number of pages, or chapters, should I say, chapters that that student has visited in total. And this is the total dwell time in that chapter. And so we see as we move from very few, very little, we rise up. But we sort of got a funnel here. We got the upper range and we got the lower range. So let's pick something like this point. So these two students have visited the same number of chapters. And this student has spent quite a lot less time than this student in doing that. Now, these lines are 250 minutes apart, so 2 lines are 500 minutes apart. So we talk about quite a lot of hours of study. So that's getting on for 400 and something, heading towards 500 minutes of difference of dwell time on all those chapters that I am calculating their time for. That's quite a lot, isn't it? So we see the sort of bottom, the quick studiers, the flip through it compared to those who are taking a long time and the sort of the range. So that's another quite detailed insight about what's going on in terms of studying things. H5P objects. So an H5P, this is a type of a drag and drop, quite nice drag and drop. It's drag it into the various things. You've got text ones and you've got icons. And once you've dragged them in, you then can click check. Here's the check, and it will tell you green you got right, pink you got wrong, and you can have a retry and do it again and click check again. So you can do this as many times as you like. Now, usefully, so when a student comes onto a page, they see this and they can have a go at it. Usefully, I can get information from the logs about this. Here's 2 entries to do with H5P objects. And this is the same H5P object, interactive content. How can risk controls be weakened or fail? And here again, it propped up here. And I just highlighted these two things. And I'm just going to highlight here. This one is telling me they viewed it. And this is telling me they submitted it. And that submit is when they click on the check my answer. View is when it comes up and they're seeing it. Submitting is when they click on to check my answer. So the logs have got information about these two actions. So I can actually start getting some insight about this. And here are my interactive objects. Here are my interactive objects, and a whole bunch of them I've created over these weeks. And this is telling me unique students, how many viewed the object, and then how many submitted. And what that means is how many actually had a go at my little sort of activity. So a student can view it, and if they don't submit, that means they've just not done it, or they've not done it fully, and they've just never bothered. I can't, I presume they've kind of jumped over it. And here we start seeing an interesting pattern again. Here, this is some interesting information. Firstly, if we look down here, so 51 students have submitted. So about half the cohort, or just under half the cohort, well, maybe just about half the cohort have actually had a go at submitting. 65 have actually viewed, which is not that many. So there's a whole bunch who've not viewed any of these things at all. But 51 actually, so it's not a lot. And then we see quite big differences. Look at this one. 48 times this has been viewed, only 3 times submitted. 34, 8, 46, 6. Different to some of them. Look at this one, 22 times viewed, 20 times submitted. So 22 students have viewed it, 20 students have submitted it, viewed and submitted. Yeah, just so I'm going to get that right. So see, now that tells me quite a difference, 48 to 3. Now that is telling me that they don't value this exercise. This exercise is, they're just thinking that's not worth doing. I won't waste my time on that. I'll jump over that. And I think that one and the lower one are probably in the same bracket. They're just not seeing a lot of value in actually using that exercise. Whereas these ones, 22-20, they are seeing value. Those who get to it are seeing real value in that exercise. So I'm learning about my exercise design and what it is that I'm doing well, and what is it I'm putting in for fun rather. And I've done it because I thought I've got to fit in something maybe, but perhaps actually it's not really valued by students. So that's something. I can plot that on a scatter plot. So each dot represents one of my H5P exercises or objects. And this is number of times the unique students who viewed it. So this one has been viewed by 34 students, viewed by 34, and submitted by, was it 8 or 9? So that's probably that lower one. Where is it? That one's probably that one, 34, 8. Yeah, that'll be that one. Then we've got that one down there that was 40 odd and only 3. So the dotted line represents the equal time. So here, you can't have any dots up here, by the way. You can't have unique students submitting without viewing. You have to have viewed it to submit it. So you can't have this part here. But so the maximum that can be is on this dotted line. That's the only place, that's the furthest they can get. So we got up here, these ones have been well used. 20 times they've been submitted after 22 kind of time. So these are highly valued. So the closer to this line, the more valued I think the students are seeing these exercises. Down here, these are the lower valued H5P exercises. When you get, this page has 2 exercises on, so they come up and it's an exercise, they're analyzing an event. They've got to analyze what type of event is and what the consequences. So this is all part of it's all part of risk. So they would answer both of these when they come to this page. If we go to the log here, this is one student I picked out, just one extracted. This student is the same student. I've just picked it out a bit. So just looking at these areas, this is it's all about passenger vehicle, supply chain. And what we've got here is they viewing it. So when they open that page, that Moodle logs that both of those H5P have been viewed. So that's immediately logged. Then they are submitting, you see, and the first one, this is doing the type of event, which is the upper one, they've submitted that, then they've had another go, then they've had another go. So they've taken 3 goes probably to get it right. And then they've switched to doing the one on the consequence. And I think that meant they only did it once, so they probably got it right once. And then they move on to the next page, which has got the next event for them to check their understanding. So I can see what's going on. Aha, they tried 3 times to get that right. That's useful. If I just go down a little bit, I can just see here, here we've got some H5P object where they're just viewed. They viewed this one, they didn't try it. They viewed this one, there was no attempt was made. They viewed this one, no attempt was made. Again, so that one they viewed. Now, I don't know exactly whether that's just because of the sequence I've extracted, but it just tells you some they're not doing, others they see value in. So that's now this student, this is just an extract for this student. They've come to one of the interactive. This is actually probably the most complex interactive exercise I've got. And actually, I'm really delighted with this student because they've just viewed it and look how many times they've had a go at getting it right. There's a hell of a lot of things. In fact, this might be a bit too complicated, but they tried and they tried and they tried to get it right. And actually, it goes above there. So multiple times they've had a go at trying to get that right. And it's a very important event, actually, that analysis. But I may have to revisit it. Maybe it's too tough. So I can then get more information about sort of the timed. And let me jump over. This actually is the number of views of an object and the number of times of submitting. So this is telling me if it's above this line, it means they've had repeated attempts to actually do it more than they viewed it. If on this line means they viewed it so many times, 50 times, and they've submitted it 50 times. So that's a one-to-one relationship for seeing it and then having a go. If it's above this line, it tells me they're having to put more goes into it than they are. Again, down here, these are the objects they're not bothering with. They're viewing them, but they're not submitting. So this is another way of looking at the sort of value of the H5P, and also give me a clue about how much effort some are going into it. So this one is getting a lot of effort. That object is getting a hell of a lot of effort going into it to actually learn from it. So this is giving me some insight about my H5P activities. Oh yeah, if we go back to this student that tried it again and again and again, I can get more information from this, because what I can do is I can work out how long they have spent. So if I compare row upon row, when they submit something, they've had to think about it beforehand. So they've been looking at it. So the time they spent on it is the time since the last click. So when I did a book, if you remember, I did a row from the row above. Here I do the row from the row below, but I can work out that there was a minute in between this submission and then the next submission. They had a minute of thinking about it. So I can start actually adding up how long they're working on these interactive objects. So I can extract this information, and this tells me the number of exercises that a student has submitted, I had a go at, and then the total time they have spent on all those efforts. So these students have done 14 exercises, and this is giving me an idea of how long they have spent on those. And see, this obviously the big students tried a lot of it, spent a long time on exercise. But these ones are putting a lot of effort. They are using these exercises, and they're putting effort into learning from them. So yeah, I can get some insight from that. So there we go. I've sort of gone through that. It's quite a lot of that stuff there. And we get back to our original questions, like what can I learn from Moodle logs? What should I change as a result of these insights? What learning should I share with colleagues? And so just before I go, I just thought I'd show you a bonus plot. This is my bonus plot. This, I can work out which hour of the day a student is studying in. So midnight, 1 in the morning, 9 in the morning, noon, 1 in the afternoon, 2 in the afternoon. And I've looked at books and the interactive exercises and the quizzes. And you can see the peak time for studying is 3 till 5. That seems to be the peak zone. We get some going late. The quietest time is 6 or 7 in the morning. That's when students aren't, that's when they're snoring there. So I just thought I'd throw that one in there. Okay, so I would very much welcome sort of throwing open. I think you've probably got a feel for the kind of things that can be learned from this, but maybe can we, before we, I don't want to offer my stuff, you know, I'll chip in really if we get a bit of a discussion going about what can we learn from logs? What should I change? What should we change? What should we share? And what should we do with it with students? Can we ask for a few thoughts on that?
Firstly, can I just say thank you very much, Philip, for a very insightful talk. That's some major data work you've done there. And yes, does anyone have anything they'd like to put in the chat, or unmute yourself, please, and ask Philip a question or start the discussion off? I know that this kind of insight is going to be very useful going forward, and it's how we now handle that across lots of different systems. So that's something that we're going to obviously be looking at going forward, sort of anyway. Tony, please.
So I'm assuming I'm the only Tony.
I think so. Sorry.
Yeah, some really interesting data. I think a lot of it, as you said, it's an advanced. It was tagged as an advanced presentation, and I think a lot of the kind of the sort of the coding to get the timestamps is a bit beyond my capabilities. But obviously, it's really valuable to kind of get an idea of what's working and what to continue with. I think what I was particularly interested in were the simple bar charts where it's showing the total interaction and for a particular book to see what people are flagging, because from my sort of I guess from a course leader point of view, as well as teaching on several modules, for me it's useful to be able to see quickly who's just not engaging at all, and to sort of have a cutoff and then either follow up with those students myself, or to flag it up with their personal tutor to be able to follow up with them. Because at the moment, I think I said to you at the start of the meeting, when we were sort of logged in a bit early, was just really that I'm a bit lost. Like you showed at the start, there are all those in Moodle. There's the activity log and the completion and all the different bits of data that you can pull together. But actually that graph for me was really valuable to be able to just look at it very quickly and say, you know, these students, their student numbers, they need to be contacted to check everything's okay, find out if there are any reasons they're not engaging, and to, if there aren't any valid reasons, to give them a kick up the bum, and obviously remind them that, you know, engagement equals grades. So but again, I have to say I'm new to pivot tables. I've sort of seen them in the list there, but I've never actually used them. So I don't know if there are any good resources or a sort of a workflow would be really handy, just to know how someone like me who hasn't got any experience in pivot tables could sort of you know, fairly sort of quickly and easily try to pull those data out and flag those up. So whether there's anything pre-existing, or you know, whether I could speak to you know, the SciELearn team or someone like that to try and sort of help me put those together.
Good points. Yeah, I think that knowledge of what a student's getting up to, and being able to get a very detailed but rapid overview of what they do, it has been extremely useful to me. And I've been pondering how to use it. I've certainly had a conversation with one student, because he came to a seminar and I had a one-on-one with him. And I said, look, you are not studying this properly. And I didn't show him the data, but I was absolutely confident that I was right and I really knew. And I mean, he certainly didn't challenge me. There wasn't some secret database in Moodle that said, aha, actually he has been studying. He really hadn't been studying. And I was absolutely on firm territory. So I think the fragmentary nature of the various reports leaves you a bit scratching your head. Do you have the full picture? Do you not? Are you certain? Are you not? Whereas my analysis, I was, you know, it was concrete. I knew what was going on there, and I found that to be very helpful. I have emailed a few students to try and encourage them to do more. I have been also, the other strategy I've got is, well, let this run without me making interventions and just see how it goes. Because I could bring in the future the correlation with their marks, and I could start looking at the data and their marks to see which components seem to be providing them insight in order to get a good assessment result. You know, I could run a regression model on it to actually try to see what were the key components that really contributed to the mark. That could be something, and in a way, by letting it run free, that might get better data for that analysis. So I'm a bit caught between two ideas. One, to intervene, to say, come on, study harder. The other, to stand back as a researcher and sort of say, oh no, I'll let this experiment run as it is, and then learn from it. So I'm a little bit caught in that idea, between those two ideas.
I was going to say, if that's all right, I think that was a really sort of one or two sort of observations, but I'd really like to know, almost cross table every single thing you've got against their assessment end outcome.
Yeah.
Which obviously, but that's super frustrating that you almost can't let the full year pan out to know who was engaged and who dropped out and who found it too damn hard. You can't get that future insight on today's log, so you can't make that decision week 3 to say, well, this is the student that did well, this is the baseline for them, and this is the poor student that, I don't know, either unengaged or was ill or whatever, you know. This is their sort of timeline. But it's super, I don't know, I'd love to get a bit closer to it. But I said, the thing we've noticed in the past, because I sort of find the logs really interesting but endlessly perplexing, because sometimes you look for something, you look for a very specific thing, and you get so close to it, but then you sort of, when you think about the what ifs, if you add those to your conclusion, you think, oh, I don't know, because I say, like, some of the students on there was one of your H5P ones, I think was probably the clearest. There was I don't know, what it was, like 40%, and one was like 40% involved, and one was 80%.
Yes,
I think that's it. But I think that's, I think that one is probably a clear one for me, where you might find what happened is the student logged in. So like this, you know, I could have logged in at where we started at 3. I just stopped for 10 minutes and then I returned. So that gap of time is almost lost. So actually, to map my start point and my end point doesn't necessarily mean that's it doesn't mean how long I've been, if you see what I mean.
No, you're right. There is noise. There's definitely noise in the data. You can't be absolutely certain how exactly whether they just left the page open and went off to make a cup of tea and all that kind of stuff. But you're hoping in the mass of data to see enough of a signal coming through to be confident. I think if we go back up to the early stuff about the pages, all the chapters, as they call it, they didn't click on all those chapters. They've only clicked on some of those chapters, therefore they haven't clicked on others, so they haven't seen them. And that you can be more confident, or certainly be confident that these ones down here have not looked at those chapters, and these ones down here have not looked at books. So there is some, the confidence in the data does vary a bit. The dwell time analysis, I know, is prone to a bit of error, but I think the overall picture is probably, the pattern is probably pretty good.
Yeah, no, definitely. The only other thing that's kind of curious, but I don't know, I almost have to say this in a sort of antagonistic way, but I don't mean, but almost the other thing that's really curious in the data is I think it's the session I went to before, I don't know, too many today, but one of the sessions someone mentioned about kind of the asynchronous sort of content, was basically the content that students learn. It clearly looks like it in your case. You could it looks like I could read a hell of a lot from your content and not turn up to the live sessions and be doing pretty well. I'd be learning stuff. So some people, it's like a clear link in But I guess the mapping that back to just the learning outcome, just the nuts and bolts of, you know, why you're studying this and what is the assessment you're trying to measure. That would be really interesting as well to map to that, because I don't think you will, or don't get me wrong, I'm definitely antagonistic and devil's advocate, but I don't think it's true. I think probably the opposite, but you might find that students have skipped stuff that they perceived wasn't relevant. You know, that it's like, well, that clearly isn't something we're being tested on, or I don't know.
I'm certain that there is definitely there's definitely various strategies that students use, aren't there? There's the get through the degree. It's like learning. I've got a daughter learning to drive, and many of her friends are trying to get through the test with the minimum hours in a car. You know, and I think students get the degree with the minimum hours in lectures or minimum hours studying, isn't there? There's that strategy, and there's the maximizing strategy, which I want to learn everything and so on. So if you teach degree apprentices, they come along and they want to maximize their knowledge. They're not interested. They're not so focused on just getting the marks. Obviously it's important, whereas I think a lot of our ordinary undergraduates, you know, they are prioritizing marks over other things, and I can see that some people have just come on, just done the quizzes, done nothing else, and they just do the quiz, which is an online test, and do nothing else, don't bother looking at any of the lectures. Now I kind of know that they could get away with that, because they could do the reading, because the actual tests I do, online tests, are linked to specific reading, whereas my assignments are linked to what I cover in my videos and exercises in H5P, and they are very good. So I'm going to be very interested to see whether there's a split in those assessments. The online test performance may be much less linked to book chapter, and the other one may be much higher, more linked to that. So I would expect that.
I mean, you could do, and I know we've done this sort of take some credit, but I don't know if we really did much of it. But there was a lecturer that did this with quizzes. They had lots and lots of, you know, information, and they had lots of quizzes to match to each thing. Now the end unit assessment was an exam, so it was literally crystal clear that if you've learned every single thing on every single week, you're going to get 100% in this exam. You're going to learn it. But the thing that was really interesting is some of the mocks. You could actually, I don't know, maybe a teeny bit late this week, but it might be a really good exercise, maybe at Christmas, something to do just a short quiz, maybe for fun, literally for fun, mock, but put everything in it, knowing what you've taught. You put everything in it, and then you've got a very clear lens that you can put that against this data to see, does this clearly stack up, that, you know, these are the three. I mean, it'd be painful to look at, because you literally got to look at every student, and so much to analyze. But that would be an interesting, fun thing. But I don't think it would taint your research. I don't think it would taint anything, because nobody would. It's still a like a preemptive measure before the end assessment, so it's not indicative of final grades. But you'd get. So I'll shut up.
Well, one thought I've had about this is have we been doing enough to explain to the students how to study this year? We've been very busy creating the material, very busy putting it together, videos into books and so on. But I do reflect and think I probably haven't spent enough time, certainly at the outset, explaining actually how this is a new way of studying, and this is how we should do it, and how they should do it. And I reckon maybe some of this spread here, this amount of time put in against the chapters, I think maybe some of this spread is due to students not really knowing, are they supposed to really study hard or not? That may be something we could accuse ourselves of a weakness we've actually brought to the table, I think. And, you know, what is my H5P objects? Have I done enough explanation as to why I think it's beneficial for them to have a go at the objects and exercises? Maybe I haven't done enough there. And if we were going to do the same thing next year, I would put more effort there. I think I'll put more effort into explaining, to say, look, it really is worthwhile. Don't just jump over it. It's worthwhile. I have said a little bit of that, but I think I could do more. And then I'd like to see, do they twig that? Do they twig that early? And does that make a difference?
I just sort of jump in there because we're getting close to the end. But obviously, like you say, and what the SU sort of was saying this morning about kind of really signposting and being explicit with kind of how to learn in this particular model. Now, I fully appreciate that you had to spend the time initially just creating. Things had to be made to be able to get this data to start with. So, you know, you spend your time making H5P, not explaining why you're making it to the student. But to ask you this question, going forward, you've now got the resources. Would you, from what you've seen here, remove some of the harder ones, or would you just scaffold how you start teaching it to make the harder ones a different way of looking at things, if that makes sense?
Yes, I think I would I would use this data to reflect on each of my exercises. And I would think, okay, is that just the bleeding obvious I've asked them to do there? And that's why I think they're skipping over it. And then I would look at, there was obviously some that really were the sweet spot, you know, 20 out of 22 were doing it. So I'm thinking, yeah, that's pretty good. My task there is to try and up that 22 to, that's only 20% of the cohort. I want to try and get that to a higher level. But obviously those that found it, they like it. And then the very difficult one, I was going, maybe it's a bit too tricky here. Maybe I should split this down in some way, or in some other way. Yeah, revisit that. I think it might be clever, but actually, because I did an exercise in class where I actually get them as groups to sort paper. I chopped the bits of paper up and they had to reorganize it a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. And I had to translate that into H5P. But of course, now they're doing it alone. They're not as a group. They can't chat. And so, you know, it's not exactly the thing. So maybe I hadn't adapted it sufficiently for the new learning process. So I think this data does make me think, I better go and have a rethink there. So I do think that it's very helpful closing the loop in a way, this data, because the more you understand, the more you dig into it, the more you have to reflect on, the more insights that you have, rather than being blind and just heading off. So yeah, this is very good for cycling around. One thing I wanted to say is about should I reveal this to students? How much? What should be revealed to students? You know, there's a good argument to say a student should be able to benchmark themselves against others. I'm sure there are some students who think they're really engaging, then they would see others and go, wow, they're doing much more studying than me. And that might be an encouragement. So there's one way you could use this data to actually feed it back to them so they could see it themselves, interrogate it themselves. A downside of that, I think, is the more they know the data, the more they'll game it, and they'll start saying, well, I'll just click on all these clicks and you'll be none the wiser, Dr. Brabazon. You'll just think I've looked at it and I haven't. I've just got clicks for you. So there is a bit of that might happen if you start saying to students. So a secrecy may be helpful in actually monitoring and designing the course. So there are, yeah, again, pros and cons to those arguments.
Just before we run out of time, there's a question that's been sent from Paul in the chat, which is there contrasting data from other universities that might aid our interpretation of these data points?
No idea. No idea. Yeah. I don't know whether anybody's dug into this kind of stuff before. Yeah. So yeah, I think more modules, more courses, more everything, you know, the digging into the data, analyzing it, and then sharing the insights probably would be useful.
I think the problem would essentially come, though, is another university may not have done as many H5P and have done something else.
Yes,
you're going to have very different comparisons.
There is that. Yeah. Yes. I mean, but there may be the specifics of the analysis might be different, but maybe the insights may be similar.
I hope that answers your question, Paul.
Something just a thought. You might already know this, but maybe not. But in Moodle, you can. It's kind of annoying, but it's one of those things. But if you extracted your H5Ps, if you had everything as a separate object in Moodle, not as a book, if you then enable there's like completion tracking for students. If you label it sort of as manual, which I think I think you'd have to edit every item, so it's a slow going. But you could, if you knew it was ready in that form, you could then tell students week one that I would really value you in marking stuff when you think it's complete. And you could even secretly give them a badge if they've done 80% completion of a unit. It could trigger, you can do clever stuff like that. But you'd have to, I don't know, it might not be too late to say it, but I think you'd have to sort of re-engineer a lot of stuff to do it. So it's not ideal, the embed in books to do that, but it'd be super good in that method if you really want to show students, let's say the opposite in some ways, but let them know how good students do engagement. you could add that. But I don't know.
Yes, in doing this, I would say that you sort of discover there's a lot about Moodle that I don't know. Things like the hyperlinks don't feature in the logs at all. So if you've set up things as hyperlinks, you've got no idea whether they were clicked on and so on. So some of my reading is linked by hyperlink, but I've got no information about what they have, how many students have used that. So I think, oh, next time I'll set those up as a URL, let's say, and then I'll be able to track that more. So there is the how to use Moodle. I think that's a point of reflection. Once you dig into the logs, you start thinking, well, I'd really like to know this. Okay, well, then I've got to use Moodle in a different way to how I'm using it if I want to learn that information, get that insight.
Well, thank you very much, Philip. It is time before we move on to the next session. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending it. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, that was a phenomenally detailed and very insightful session. So thank you again, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.